So, we are ending our series on the book by Jeff Foster, and we are on the Sunday about addiction, and then we have one more Sunday left. Some of you may feel like the topic of addiction is completely irrelevant to you in your lives. You may not feel like that after this Sunday. And I invite you to open up to that possibility, not as a bad thing. It is no secret that in this day and age, addiction is running rampant through our communities. Addiction to prescription medication, addiction to opioids, addiction to, fill in the blank, all of the old traditional things, right? And no doubt, there is not a family or an individual in the house that it has not affected in some way, either personally with your own struggles or because of a relationship that you have, right? Whether it be at work, whether it be a friend, whether it be a family member. And what better than to become aware of the spiritual side of this concept of addiction? Right? Not just all of the human side or the textbook stuff, right? That can be helpful, that can be great. But to really dive in to what this might be on a spiritual level. Do you believe that that can be valuable? That when we have spiritual principles and when we have what in Unity we call truth, we approach our world differently. We see things differently. And if you believe in our principles, which is that everything that we see or perceive or react to or act in accordance with, we shift, we change, we become a part of, and we create, then it really matters, does it not, what we hold in our minds? It really matters what we hold in our minds. When we perceive, when we relate, when we connect. And who doesn't want to practice principles that help us connect more, right? That help us heal. Who doesn't want to wake up to an idea that I had something in my mind that may have been crystallizing a lack in you, when in fact I could have come from a whole different perception and a different perspective that enabled your wholeness to shine through in even greater ways. So we're going to talk about some concepts from the book today, and we're going to also talk about some concepts from Myrtle Fillmore, Unity's co-founder, when she took a deep dive into some of these concepts. So you may have some assumptions about today and the ideas about addiction, and you don't have to let go of any of those assumptions or any of those things that you've learned about it, but we're not talking about textbook stuff here today. We're talking about spirituality. And we're talking about the idea of addiction that may not be so obvious to everyone, and also a spiritual approach based on principle with how to presence it. We're talking about a basic component of the human condition. And addiction has gotten large, hasn't it? You hear the word and it's like, not me, I don't want, or if I did have it, it's like, I don't want to have that anymore, or, whatever it is, it's like not good, right? It's not great. It's not like, oh yeah, addiction, I got some of that. Me too. Want me to come up and talk? I can share some things. But we all on some level, and not to be negative Nancy here, but we all on some level have things that we do, we activate, or we participate in that are not for our highest good. And even though mentally we would like to not be doing them, we continue. And we don't really feel like we can control it. Or we've tried everything and we can't control it, right? We've just had to surrender to that's how I am, or whatever it is. So that's another concept of addiction. We tend to label addiction to those behaviors that are really visible, to those behaviors where we can really see the destruction, right? where it's obvious. We can point to it and say, well, that's not good for anybody. That's not good for you and anybody else. But how many of us have things that no one ever even sees, no one ever knows, but in our heart of hearts, we know, man, I am not here to be living like this. Man, if I could only just stop doing that. Why do I do that? Why do I act like this over and over? Why do I feel like this? Why do I hear this in my head over and over? Why do I think like this? Why do I do that over and over again? It can be as simple as that, right? That in the human condition, part of the human condition is that we repeat some patterns and habits that do not serve our highest good. It's not such a horrific thing, is it? Right? At its height of destruction, addiction affects families, careers, relationships. It can destroy or sever those. It can break trust. It can harm health. And it can help us lose one of the most valuable things in life, which is intimacy. Intimacy with self and intimacy with others. It can take years of healing work to learn how to be with it, or if you believe in the possibility of getting over it, to learn how to get over something. But worst of all, it can affect quality of life, and it can even take life, right? Well, nothing can take life because life has no opposite. But it can take the animation of life in this physical form. So our conversation today, though we'll be diving into the spiritual approach and the spiritual aspects described in Jeff Foster's book and discussed by Myrtle Fillmore, this approach, this spiritual approach, is not meant to discredit anything. It's not meant to discredit or throw out any program that works, like recovery programs, any system, or anything that one has proven to themselves to be effective, or even any idea that one has crystallized in mind that has kept them, right? Kept them on a path of wholeness. So it's not meant to take away or invalidate anything that works. Addiction can be as complex as the individual is, right? And we know ourselves as individuals, we are very complex, right? So there's no one size fits all to fix something or to heal something. But we can introduce a possibility that, spiritually speaking, there is a simplicity to addiction. Spiritually speaking, there is a simplicity to addiction. But first, we have to go through some of the ways and the ideas of how complicated we make it. When addiction is misunderstood and spiritual principles are not applied, we can believe a lot of things about it that I don't think are true. We can believe that people don't care enough to heal. We can believe that people don't care enough to stop some behavior. That they don't care enough about the ones they love, they don't care enough about their lives, or they aren't strong enough to do it. That they somehow lack strength and courage or care. Or that somehow they're inherently broken. That there's something actually wrong with them in a way that there is not something wrong with someone else. So here is the spiritual nutshell, the spiritual principle we're trying on today. And if any of this comes as a shock, just open up to the possibility that it might be true and how that truth might transform your own experience with addiction or your relationship with anyone and the world around you. The nutshell is that you are not broken. Period. You are not broken, and you have not been made incorrectly. You don't have faulty parts. That's the spiritual nutshell. You are whole, and there is not something wrong with you. These spiritual principles, these spiritual ideas, when really applied, can make a recovery plan more effective. Myrtle Fillmore, and it took me a while to find this, but I remember reading Myrtle Fillmore saying, and this, I held on to this in such deep ways. She wrote that people struggling with addiction are actually very spiritual people. Very, very spiritual people with a deep, deep desire for spiritual expression, with something that is such a longing, something so known in them, like such a capacity that sometimes dealing with what the world looks like, it overwhelms. And so that passion, that drive, that spiritual urge is then directed into other things to the extreme. To the extreme. Here are some of her words from her book, How to Let God Help You. It's in the chapter 17, The Longing of Our Souls. She says, let us see whether we cannot really find out what our souls are longing for. We condemn men for drinking liquor, not women. No, just kidding. That's just how it's written. But here you go, men. Guess what? No, just kidding. Again, you got to make it light if you're talking about addiction all Sunday. Not light beer, just light. We condemn men for drinking liquor, but we should not do so. The drinker has a great longing to do something. He does not want to follow the common walks of life. He wants to follow the higher ways. Not understanding this urge within himself, he thinks that he can satisfy it with sense. So he takes something stimulating. We are never satisfied through sense. It enslaves us more and more. She goes on to say, those who give way to appetite, who drink liquor, who take drugs, are hungering and thirsting after righteousness. And she points us to the scriptural passage, blessed are they that hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Relating it to that internal wanting, that spiritual condition of wanting one's awakening, wanting wholeness, knowing that it's here, but then striving not on the inside to fulfill it, right, but striving to pull things, to go to things on the outside that will relieve that feeling, that will feel like an arrival, that will feel like a completion, that will feel like respite, that will feel like it takes that urge or that unsettling and calms it. She goes on to say, in most cases, an individual who drinks too much is an unusual soul. That's what we can say anytime that someone needs a new word. Just be like, I'm just an unusual soul. She says it's an unusual soul, a soul who has developed some of his faculties and powers until he is very sensitive. He longs for the perfect balance to enable him to express rightly these powers that he feels but does not know how to express. How does that change the concept in your mind of yourself or other or this condition in the world? You know, there have even been studies, and I didn't bring any of them with me today, but there have been studies in healing communities, about what works best. And what works best is having connections and having healthy relationships and healthy things to do. That in fact, with animal studies and with people, when there are positive conditions around and when people are linked in community and connected, those desires go away. Or maybe the desires don't go away, I don't know, but something supersedes it, right? The healthy activity supersedes it. Because there is a desire for connection, there is a desire for communion within oneself. And when that can't be found anywhere, right? It has to be drawn from something. And we in our society today are plagued with disconnection, are we not? I mean, some people don't have a hug during a whole month. You know, some people don't have someone that they can touch, or someone that they can just call and go over and go to a movie with, or someone that they can talk to or reveal something to, right? And what compounds addiction worse than anything else? Shame. Feeling like, I don't know how to solve this, and I don't know any other way to approach it. I don't know how to get what I need, and I don't want anyone to see me like this. I don't want anyone to know what I do. Think about if all your little stuff was just out there, you know? All the ones that we have that nobody does know about. Or all the times that we wish, you know, we're in the movie that we could forget in our heads. And imagine if it was all out there. And imagine if it was out there and there was understanding. Imagine if it was out there and there was compassion. Imagine if there was out there and there was community. Imagine if the layers of shame and blame and misunderstanding were taken off of it completely. And instead, when people saw themselves in each other, they went, I experienced that too. And I see you as no less whole, no less magnificent, no less beautiful. I see you as holy. And that, in fact, we deepened our connections in those moments, right? So understanding the spiritual patterns are significant. Myrtle says, first of all, the first thing to do, and this can be hard for some, first of all, drop out of your mind the idea that the habit is a terrible thing. What? Myrtle, what? She goes on to talk about when we think it's terrible, you know, we're not letting in the Christ consciousness. We're misallocating power. She says the drink craving habit is not a moral shortcoming. It is a crying out. She goes on to talk about a strong desire for a fuller realization of life sometimes leads to the use of stimulants. She says the way to freedom and wholeness and real satisfaction is revealed when we look Godward. The first step in healing another's physical weakness and tendency to drunkenness is to give up all grief and worry and to withdraw all condemnation and censor for the liquor, for those who serve it, and for the individual. Now think about the time she was living in, right? The time of like, if something's hurting people, ban it, right? And in this struggle, she was redirecting people to go, you know what, it's not that thing. It's not the drink. As long as we're looking at the drink as the object of it, you know, you're going to have to keep putting things in cages to get them away from someone, but you're still going to have this urge because we're misunderstanding this urge for stimulants, for this urge for a spiritual stimulant, this deep dive into the self. And she says you have to take all of that off. And that's exactly what Jeff Foster is talking about in the book, The Deepest Acceptance. He goes into this chapter, into the teaching that we have to just be, well, we don't have to, but we have the invitation to be with the urges and the feeling, and also to be with the desire to get rid of it. But can we just, instead of trying to either repress it or stepping into acting on it, can we develop a spiritual practice of presencing it, inquiring, learning, really learning what goes on for us when these things come up, learning what it feels like, listening to the body, listening to the mind, and sitting with it, and being with the discomfort, and then diving in deeper to a deeper layer, a deeper understanding. Jeff Foster's wording brings us to the place of deepest acceptance, where we can just be with what is, not focusing on the object, but instead allowing the object to point us to an awakening, and an awakening that can help us reveal our full wholeness. And not that that will necessarily get rid of or dissolve the desires that we might be at war with, but that we let go of the war. You know that book, Feelings Buried Alive Never Die? If you don't know it, you don't need to know it for this. But it's that same idea that when we try to stuff something, when we're ashamed of something, when we push it far down, it doesn't die, it just becomes stronger. I remember when I was little, do you remember the first time you don't want to go here. Do you remember the first time you had a dream that you were kind of ashamed of and horrified that you had, and you didn't want anyone to know you had it? Do you know what I'm talking about? Anything. Maybe not. Maybe it's just me. But I remember having a dream that was worldly inappropriate, and I remember being like, oh, what? What's wrong with me that I dreamt this? I was just sickened by myself and ah! And I remember talking to my mom, and I don't know if it was after I had another one or what, and she was brilliant. She just went into, and I was young at the time, but she just went into the creativity of your brain, and that's what it does, and things can represent other things. So even if it, this is the scenario, what else could that mean? What could that mean that this, so it wasn't, the physical things of what happened in the dream. And then she also told me, which was key, she said, if you really hate it and you're not okay with accepting your dream, whatever she said, it was just oh, your dreams are your dreams, just let them be. But if you really don't want it, what happens? You get another one, and another one, and another one, and they get worse. And all of a sudden, you're like a horror filmmaker in your mind or something when you go to sleep and you wake up tortured by them because you are so not okay with having them, right? You're so not accepting of having them. You think they somehow reveal your wholeness or your lack of wholeness, if you have good ones or not good ones, that then it compounds and it expands. The process of addiction is no different. It's that same idea. So it's jumping into the concept that the idea is not bad. The ideas are just, imagine that as being your thoughts and your feelings and what happens in the moment and what triggers it. All of that is not bad. And one person could never be bad. Because at your core, you're born blessed. At our core, we are whole. And if we could take something that we might feel like hiding about or shameful about or just at our wits' end and I've given up on trying with this one. If we could diffuse that bomb and just let it be what it is, the healing that Myrtle Fillmore is talking about, the revelation of wholeness within, will be there. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the cravings won't be there, but it's understanding it spiritually. Jeff Foster says, any addiction cure or remedy or therapy that focuses on the addiction object rather than the seeking within the addict, the seeking in the addict will not truly resolve addiction. It may help, but it won't heal in the true sense of the word. So it may help as far as changing the outer, right? Changing what we do. But when we have a true spiritual calling, it takes a true spiritual solution. He says that when this is happening for us, we are trying to fix a primal sense of separation, trying to fix incompleteness. And both Myrtle Fillmore and Jeff Foster and Eckhart Tolle go into the idea that no external object or person can ever do this. No matter how much we do or take or try, it can never be done. He says what we are longing for deep down is intimacy with ourselves. And when he dives into the self, he dives into the unity consciousness, your wholeness, yourself that is unified, it is oneness. And that's what Myrtle Fillmore talked about, looking Godward. When we feel like we have no choice, look Godward. He goes on to say all urges, in fact, all seeking, always begin with a general sense of lack. And then this general lack becomes the lack for something specific. He goes into this idea that even the original meaning of the word want, he says, was lack. It's only for the past few hundred years that want has been synonymous with desire. And so when we say, I want X, Y, and Z, it really means I feel as though I lack it. It's missing. In Myrtle Fillmore's statement, one of her power statements of faith was that I shall not want. That's her way of saying, I shall not be in lack. I shall not be in this space that I believe that anything is lacking. Jeff Foster gives us a key here, though. He says, the first want that we often want to get rid of, the biggest one, is wanting itself. It's having any wants. And he proposes the idea of just being okay with that, accepting in that feeling, being present to a want, not trying to annihilate it, not trying to repress it. We've seen, haven't we seen in some church systems and in society what happens when we repress something? When we keep pressing it down and keep pressing it down and keep pressing it down, it deforms, it contorts, it gets incredibly dysfunctional, and it pops back up again, right? What would it be like if we could be so intimate with ourselves and intimate with others that we could simply allow it? Because we've done the inner work and we've allowed ourselves to presence that which we want to get rid of and that which we're okay with, and we just let them be in the space so that we recognize and come to the awakening and the feeling of knowing the power is not there. The power is within. The power is right here. We have to become comfortable with our discomfort. Jeff Foster says, what you really want is for the present moment to be deeply okay again. What you really want is to no longer be in want. What you really want is to no longer be in lack. What you really want is for all of this discomfort, he says, to be deeply accepted. You want to be deeply okay where you are. You want to be at home, here and now. Can we take a moment together in this sanctuary, through the live stream, and for our world, for ourselves? If there is any space we can be present to, where the idea of addiction comes up or is felt or the effects are felt, that we can breathe into these words together. You are deeply accepted. Together, you are deeply accepted. And really get into that. Get into the self or the person that you're picturing. Feel that authentic and beautiful and innocent desire for love and wholeness and spiritual expression. You are deeply accepted. Together. You are deeply accepted. I am deeply accepted. Together. I am deeply accepted. And in your heart of hearts, breathe into these statements. I see you. I honor you. I honor the spiritual experience happening within you. I stand with you in knowing your absolute wholeness and your absolute freedom and divine timing. I honor you. Thank you for being on this journey with me or as me. I am open to seeing all things differently now. I bless you. And so it is. Namaste.